This latest episode of the Digital Circus was a total roller coaster of emotions, filling us with hope for a happy ending for everyone, or perhaps even a tragic outcome that would leave us emotionally destroyed. However, and as to be expected from the unpredictable Gooseworks, neither of these two situations occurred. Instead, it was a confusing and unexpected ending that left the community divided. But no matter how this adventure ended, what is undoubted is that we were given a huge amount of winks and details to theorize about what is happening, what happened, and what will happen in the story. One of the most important comments is the one Kinger makes before the end. When Caine mentions how disastrous it would be to modify the memories and thoughts of the circus members too much, we see Kinger mention Scratch, the first abstracted. This comment makes Caine very nervous, and he attempts to change the subject. But seeing how angry everyone is with him, he decides to flee. This simple comment has caused a lot of intrigue in the community. But who is Scratch? Well, it seems we have seen this character before, at least indirectly. A long time ago in the exclusive Glitch Productions Discord, which is only accessible by paying for the Glitch In membership and gives access to unreleased content from all Glitch series, more information was revealed to us about this Scratch that Kinger mentions. This turns out to be that yellow dog we saw on the crossed out doors in the hallway of rooms. At first, like the rest of the abstracted characters, his name was unknown, but this changed thanks to Alicia Howard, a 3D artist working at Glitch Productions who is mentioned in the series credits. Alicia told us on Discord that this character was named Dobby by the community, a name that, despite her liking it, wasn't the correct one, with it being Scratch, since we can see it in the file of the image used on the hallway door. And that solves the mystery, right? Well, not exactly, since Alice herself says that these are the names she put, but nothing confirms that these are the official names, as it all depends on whether Gooseworks decides to keep the names Alice placed in the files. If this were the case, there is still a detail we must mention, and that is that Scratch is a quite common name in animation. For example, Scratchy, the cat from The Simpsons, who, together with the mouse Itchy, is a parody of Tom and Jerry. Furthermore, it is also good to mention the Scratch platform, whose mascot is a yellow cat. Now, if we consider that Gooseworks might not have taken into account the names Alice put in the files, it is possible that Scratch is a character yet to be met, while this yellow dog would keep the name the community gave him, Dobby. This could be the case since in episode 4, that is, The Adventure at Spudgy's, among the promotional materials we could see a hot dog named Dobby Dog, whose wrapper features the face of the yellow dog. Besides costing $57.57, quite expensive, this number seems important in Glitch promos, as it's the same number on the license plates of Pommy's red van. But returning to Dobby, there is a character too similar to this one. But the most curious thing is that the series where he appears also has many similarities with the Digital Circus. And of course, I'm speaking of Gravity Falls, which is also a series with a childlike appearance, but with a darker background than meets the eye. It is right here where we see a yellow dog as well. He appears when Mabel eats some candies discontinued for having too much sugar for human consumption. But when Mabel eats too many of these, she enters a quite strange psychedelic trip, which, as a curiosity, reminds us of the one we also saw with Jax in this last episode. This yellow dog would later be known as the Beast, since in the book of Bill Cipher, that is the final and interdimensional enemy of the series, after being imprisoned, he lets us see a few of the creatures that accompany him in prison. Among these is the Beast, which is curiously the yellow dog Mabel saw in her hallucination. It is here where they tell us that this creature is just as guarded as Bill, as it is just as dangerous, being more important than it seemed in its first appearance. This reminds us a lot of what happened with Dobby, or Scratch, since if it is confirmed that he is the first abstracted, it is very probable that he was also another C&A worker. We suppose this because in one of the scenes with Abel, the lying mannequin who may not have lied entirely, in the papers of his plan we see a couple of somewhat blurry writings. In these, he mentions his old C&A co-workers not abstracted, the only one still surviving being Kinger. The curious thing is that the crossed out but more visible name seems to say Kaufmo? This turns out to be very curious, since thinking that Kathmo is a former CNA worker is an idea that never crossed our minds. Another of the crossed out names seems to say Wormo, or something like that. This could be that green and orange character we see among the crossed out doors, just like Scratch. The other two names cannot be distinguished well enough, so it is possible that Scratch is one of them, since the importance that Kinger and Caine give him is more than notable. Plus, everything seems to indicate that Scratch was Caine's first guinea pig. We suppose this because Scratch is mentioned right after Caine comments on the grave consequences of modifying the thoughts and memories of the people found in the simulation too much. The last wink we have towards Scratch in this episode is the locket that Abel has. We see this completely at the end of the episode after Caine finishes him off for becoming too intelligent for an NPC. Here, we see that the photo in the locket wasn't as important as we thought, being a photograph of a hot dog. The curious thing is that, as we have already mentioned, the hot dog is related to Scratchy, or at least with his name of Dobby Dog, since it is on a hot dog where we see the name Dobby Dog, alluding to the fact that the meat of the hot dog is that of Dobby, something quite dark. So with all this, what do we know about Scratch? Not too much, but as always with the clues Gooseworks leaves us, we have more than enough to speculate on the past of the circus. First of all, the fact that Scratch was the first abstracted doesn't mean he was the first human to enter the circus, but there are possibilities that, being among the first, it is possible he was a CNA worker, and consequently a colleague of Kinger. These would be the perfect candidates to experience Caine's memory modification, since Caine's goal is to keep everyone happy and, above all, distracted from their past problems. This is difficult for CNA workers, since knowing too much about the simulation makes it somewhat hard for them to enjoy the adventures with total fullness. So for Caine to do his job properly, he found no other option than to change the memories of Kinger and his companions who helped create the simulation. These erased, or rather stolen, memories are the ones we see in Caine's photographs, which, not knowing the context of those strange places, he calls macroverses. This also confirms to us that he has tried to recreate them, these being the scenarios Pomni traverses in the pilot episode after crossing the false exit door Caine created. And speaking of the exit door, we must remember that the idea had been planted that the exit door would appear in the beach adventure, something that evidently did not happen. Therefore, it may be important for one of the last two episodes of the series, resuming this idea as they are so annoyed with Caine and not resigned to being his toys for all eternity. Returning to Scratch, everything indicates that he was just one of the many victims of this cruel experiment of Caine's, since in the hallway of the circus rooms we see a huge amount of crossed out doors, all of them possibly abstracted by this mental modification of Caine. However, it seems all of them suffered this fate a long time ago, since when Ragatha asks Abel what will happen to the abstracted ones if they manage to escape the circus, she only mentions Ribbit and Kaufmo being the most recent abstracted ones, with Kaufmo suffering this cruel fate in the pilot episode, apparently upon finding this false exit Caine created, which ended up driving him to madness. All these victims had to suffer too much just for Caine to realize that modifying minds was not the solution, the only survivor being Kinger, who barely maintains his little sanity in the darkness, since in this episode we saw him return to his erratic state as soon as the light touched him, and not in a progressive way as we might think. Therefore, these modifications Caine made to his brain are more serious than we think, with Scratch being the first to demonstrate this, making him doubt his own memories to the point that this instability turned him into that glitched and formless monster we saw in the pilot episode. This small moment of lucidity on Kinger's part when mentioning Scratch may indicate to us that he meant a lot to him, being, along with Kinger and his CNA companions, the first to pass their minds to the digital plane to corroborate that everything was fine. Meanwhile, Caine saw this knowledge as an obstacle to fulfilling the task he was assigned, keeping everyone happy and distracted from the real world. This is something that Kinger and his companions evidently could not do if they only focused on analyzing the simulation. Therefore, stealing these memories was the priority, taking only a few of them at first, but seeing that it didn't affect them too much, he would take more and more, to the point where Scratch could not take it anymore. becoming the first abstracted and consequently Caine's first great failure. This is the reason why mentioning him makes him so nervous, as he doesn't want everyone to know that he's incapable of doing the only task he was programmed for. Now then, will the mention of Scratch affect the last 2 episodes of the Digital Circus in any way? It is very probable that it will, since this mysterious character wasn't mentioned for nothing. What is more than possible is that this anger and distrust everyone has towards Caine upon discovering all his lies and deceptions will turn into rebellion, that is, a refusal to participate in his adventures, something we see with Zooble that bothers him too much, and everyone refusing to do so could little by little cause the collapse of this AI, breaking the structure of the circus and letting the abstracted escape. They would seek revenge against the one who caused them so much pain, finishing off Caine, or at least damaging him to the point where the very existence of the simulation is impossible. Their destiny would be to remain forever locked in an empty world without a reason for being, but at least free from Caine's manipulation, having all the time in the world to cling to the memories they still have left and not suffer the same fate as Scratch.